Good afternoon, and welcome to the TalentReach hosted virtual event, Selling Strategies, Relationships, and Onboarding During COVID. My name is David Obelts, and I'm with the Badon Hill Group, a marketing agency that makes big business marketing available for everyone. And I'll be your facilitator today. Here are some tips for the best experience. The quality of the webinar is only as good as the worst connection between you and our presenters. Most connection issues can be resolved by exiting and rejoining the webinar. I would also like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand later this week. We'll be taking your questions for our panelists for a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. You can submit your questions in the group chat or via email at webinar.questions@badonhillgroup.com. That email address, one more time, is webinar.questions@badonhillgroup.com. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Amanda Gorlick of TalentReach. And presenters, don't forget to unmute.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining. We have had an interesting year navigating this pandemic, and TalentReach wanted to specifically discuss this topic and host this webinar as a platform to share ideas, tips, and overall support for our community. Everyone has had such a different experience through this to keep their business afloat. And TalentReach partners with a lot of small to medium-sized businesses looking for hiring help in technology and sales verticals. And we are growing, so we'd love for you to keep us in mind as we come out of this time. We're a small company. Our journey has been a little unique, and excited to hear from the panel. Sales in this environment adds an extra curveball, so I hope everyone has some takeaways after this hour. And I guess with that being said, I would like to bring in Jen Mueller as our moderator. She is amazing and will guide us through an inspirational webinar. So I will turn it over to you, Jen.
Well, thank you, Amanda, and welcome to a conversation today that should help us get to the next phase and look ahead to the next phase of the economic recovery. The focus today is around selling strategies, relationships, and onboarding during COVID. Our experts will share successful selling strategies in a mostly virtual environment, ways to maintain and grow prospect and client relationships, and how they approach onboarding new sales professionals and the accelerating time to productivity. I'll guide the conversation with the panelists for the first 45 minutes or so, and then we will open it up to audience Q&A. So if you have questions, as David mentioned, go ahead and send them in an email or put them into the chat. I might be able to work a few into the conversation, but for the most part, we will save that until the end. Now, with that, let's introduce you to the panel of experts that we will hear from today. Bilafer is responsible for leading Banzai's global sales and marketing functions. With over 25 years of experience, Kurt has held a number of sales and marketing roles at Amazon, SAP, and WePay. Earlier in his career, he started a number of companies, including Pilot Software, which was acquired by SAP in 2007. Shauna Cour leads the West sales team at Limeade. Having spent most of her career in marketing, both at Microsoft and then managing her own consulting practice, Shauna made the leap to direct sales 3 years into her Limeade tenure. As the first female VP in enterprise sales, Shauna's approach brings fresh, inclusive style to a traditional function. She values and needs empathy, trust, and transparency in every relationship, both inside and outside of work. Our next panelist is Barry Erickson, who brings 32 years of sales and sales management experience to his position as the director of the UW Foster Professional Sales Program. You know, I should probably slow down and say that right, Barry. The University of Washington Foster School Professional Sales Program. It engages sales-skilled students and over 100 companies seeking entry-level sales talent. He's also a teaching professor at the Foster School of Business, specializing in B2B sales, sales management strategies, and fundamentals. And last but not least, Joe Martino oversees the North American real estate distribution for DocuSign. His career includes more than 2 decades of sales and business development leadership in SaaS. His leadership extends to his family and community, where he embraces the opportunity to coach and positively impact others. Welcome to all of our panelists. And how about if we get to know you in a slightly different and unique way here? Pressure is on. Since we are just 3.5 weeks away from Halloween, here's the question that's going to kick us off. What do you believe to be the best Halloween candy? Barry, you're on the hot seat first.
Jen, I'm on a very busy street. We are a heavy Halloween household, and while you think you can't beat M&Ms, I think Reese's Pieces is on the upswing, big time. ET phone home.
I am not going to agree with you on that one, Barry. Let's see what Shauna has to say.
Yeah, this is a serious question for me because candy is like its own food group. I don't admit that in the halls of Limeade, but in this safe space, I'll tell you that. I would have to say, I'm going to go obscure and say a Take 5.
Oh, that's a good one that gets left off of a lot of lists. Shauna, I will give you a point for that one. Joe, what do you think? Weigh in on this one.
Well, Take 5 is like an albatross on Halloween. That's a tough one to find, but I'm going to lean into Barry here and agree with Reese's Pieces just being a huge one. I mean, my overall hit's definitely Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, but I think the Reese's Pieces are a big time upgrade. So I'm going to roll with that. Unfortunately, we're going to combine Go Cougs and Go Huskies all in one.
As long as you're not a duck,
we can be friends. We can be friends.
Yes.
Kurt, you are going to be the last one to weigh in on this. What do you believe to be the best Halloween candy?
You know, I'm old school. So for me, it's a toss up between Junior Mints or a candy corn, right? Classics.
Definitely classics. I was going to say the only obvious choice here is Junior Mints in the little boxes. So, Kurt and I are on the same page here. But fun fact, American National Confectioners Association says that sales of Halloween candy has actually gone up by more than double digits this year, despite the fact we may or may not be trick-or-treating, because apparently most of us buy candy just to eat ourselves. So that is how we are all connected together. And we are all connected by working from home, having to build relationships virtually and doing things in a different way than perhaps we did them at this time last year. So as we jump into this conversation, here's how we're going to set it up. We'll take a look at the biggest changes and then come back around for the biggest adaptations each panelist has seen within their teams and their company as it relates to sales. So Shauna, you're going to start here. What is the biggest change you have seen with your team at Limeade?
Yeah, I would say for us, our sales cycle is typically about 12 to 18 months. And there are all sorts of typically in-person touches throughout that. So whether it's meeting prospects at events, going on site to have coffee, or do an initial introduction meeting, doing finalist meetings in person. So all of that has been wiped out. And the focus is now just left on those touch points around early funnel creation through ABM, doing discovery calls, everything virtual. So it's been a huge shift for our team and how they're working. And now we're relying so heavily on trying to build rapport through just phone calls and virtual meetings. And it's a whole different way of working.
And Joe, at DocuSign, what kind of change have you seen as a result of eliminating those exact interactions and one-on-one calls and meetings that Shauna was just talking about?
Yeah, so I mean, we've obviously ramped up, a lot of our, Zoom communication and best practices and things of that nature, making sure that folks are, kind of trained and enabled with, how to connect a little more, not necessarily efficiently, that would be the wrong term, but just be more productive. I think, leading with empathy with, our massive customer base that we've got, especially from a real estate perspective here at DocuSign, to make sure that we're fitting into what their needs are and how they're managing through, this unprecedented time is a good starting point. And then from there, we're able to assess, what the needs are and, really help support whether it's growth, whether it's status quo, whether it's expansion of some of our other, services that we've got. with our, Rooms for Real Estate as an example offering, remote online notary called Ron is coming here in a couple of months, and just lining up their customer needs for success, in this remote environment, because with DocuSign especially, they're really relying on us to maintain and grow their business.
And we'll dive into that a little bit more on how you do that and how you put yourselves in the shoes of those clients in just a little bit. Kurt, I know that you have said that it is the pace of change that might be the biggest thing to adapt to. Is that when we're talking about the sales cycle or the way people are adjusting, or both?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, Banzai sells solutions to marketers to help produce events, right? So we sell a bunch of software solutions to help facilitate that. And events we know have changed. So there's a number of things. So a big part of it is providing thought leadership and guidance to them through the sales process and understanding what everybody else is doing and how they take advantage of that. And so I think you have the uncertainty of people not knowing what's going to happen. I mean, let's face it, we all thought this was a 30-day exercise, and it was 90 days. And I don't know how many days it is now, but it's a lot longer than 90 days. And so I think it's that uncertainty, and then just everybody being distributed, it's impacting the length of the sales cycles.
So, Barry, you are teaching the next generation of sales leaders. And I'm curious, what are you hammering home to your students now that might not have gotten so much emphasis a year ago?
Yeah, Jen, in the pandemic and over virtual selling, we're really promoting, as Joe had mentioned, the listening aspect of selling. It's not telling. It's not telling the customer what your features and benefits are. It's listening and then selling what their preferences are, both to your operations department inside the company, as well as back to your customers outside the company. So our emphasis is that, as Joe said, that listening piece, understand the customer's needs, get back to your operations department and sell back inside to your operations department that we can't sell the old product as its specs lay out. We have to sell what the customer wants and customize that. So then we provide a customized solution back to the customer on the other side. That's always been the truth, but now it's even much more emphasized that you must customize and you must sell inside the company as well as outside the company.
And with all of this change, Barry, of course you have to adapt, but there are some benefits and potential silver linings. How can this type of virtual environment actually increase opportunities?
Yeah, of course, as most I'm sure the audience have realized, no plane flights, no taxi cab rides, no checking into hotels, no getting rental cars. You've got a lot more time in your hands. Statistically, you have much more than twice as amount of time to make calls. So use your time efficiently, and you can make 2 times, 3 times as many calls. However, what we talk about is not to fill your whole day up with appointments, because you've got to prepare still, and you got to leave your time for follow-up. So don't cram your whole day full of cold calls.
Yeah, let's not get overly ambitious with how many calls we try to make and how many people we're trying to reach out to, because what we have seen is it's not just about the number of calls you can make, it's about the number of touch points that you can and need to create. Shauna, that's one of the ways that you and your team have adjusted. There are 4 things that you said that your team has incorporated into their selling strategies. What are those things?
Yeah, so for our team, what we're trying to do is, now that we just have these, virtual meetings and discovery calls, we're really trying to maximize those. So for instance, with a discovery call, we're trying to really build rapport there, maybe get a couple of those discovery calls. We're also then trying to have another call to prep for a demo before we're going into a finalist meeting or a demo meeting, which we weren't always doing before, but now is even more important, specifically for the point of making, those relationships solid and building rapport. We also then are trying to adjust to the times. So just creating a casual environment. We know people have Zoom burnout. They've got emotional stress that they're dealing with. So we really need to meet people where they are, care about how they're doing, how what life is for them. Again, like connect with them on the human level first, which we didn't spend as much time doing before. Really making sure they know, hey, we want this to be an open conversation. We want you to pop in. Let's just go back and forth. We don't want to present at you because we know we're all burnt out on that. And then lastly, really trying to come up with something that just makes the meeting memorable. And whether that is that we start out by saying, hey, let's just take a minute together and think about a time in your life where you were living with high well-being. What did that look like? What did it feel like? Find a picture on your phone that celebrates that and brings you to that moment to try and put people into a good headspace.
And I know one of the things, Shauna, that you had said was you don't go 5 minutes in a meeting without allowing the client or the other party to talk, which I thought is interesting because we talk about needing an exchange, but what does that actually mean? And I like that you can put a time frame around that.
Yeah, exactly. We've gotten a lot more tight about that to say, because we used to let the solutions architect sort of have their own show and let them get into the demo, have that 30 minutes. The sales director would kind of maybe sit back, check email. That's not happening now. We're saying, okay, 5 minutes in, sales director, you come in, you ask questions. Again, keep discovering and learning so that you're building that trust there.
And Kurt, for you, there's 5 minutes that you have found to be really valuable, and that is the way in which you log on to your Zoom meetings. Why is that time important for you, and how does that help you kind of ground and center the relationships?
Yeah, well, I think, everybody's talking about sort of 2 ears, 1 mouth, right? So like listen more than you speak. And I think when you join the meetings early, you build a rapport. It's really, really casual. Oftentimes you get to see what's in the background and you can ask them about what's in the background or how are they doing or how their weekend was. But I think it's how you show up for the meetings. We all know this in sales, right? There's a lot of preparation that goes into the event. But silly things now of like dressing like your customers. The reality is you don't want to come in extremely overdressed. And I wore a sports coat for 25 years, right? A suit and tie. And now I'm a t-shirt because that's kind of the people that I'm selling to. And I think that's really important is you want people to feel comfortable engaging with you in their environment, given what's going on in their world.
Well, and I think that goes to something that Joe said earlier about the empathy and how you approach these conversations. And how has that led to creative solutions? And why is creativity important in a time like this where there's a lot of uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to just, be more personal and kind of draw people in with their experience of how they're handling it. I think, we mentioned, that from a prospects, clients, partners that we're working with. I think, from an extended leadership team, standpoint, we're just as concerned about our employee base and the folks that are, on Team DocuSign as well, to make sure that, you mentioned some, experiencing burnout, Zoom fatigue, and making sure that everybody is in, appropriate spirits. And the company has just been amazing at, making sure that, folks have what they need to succeed in a work from home, a remote working environment. And they continue to do so, to make sure that folks have what they need in order to, make themselves happy, but then also in return, the whole onboarding process. I know that may be coming as a question in the future, and kind of making sure that everybody's set up to succeed, but really that focus is then cascaded onto the customer and really fulfilling what their needs are with our, agreement cloud narrative and making sure that they're set up.
Well, and being willing to do kind of that one-time special offering, right? And not coming back to them and saying, look, if we want to add this, now it's going to increase your buy with us, when you know that they can't do that at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there has been, it's just been a lot of creativity, through this time. I think, Kurt said it best a few minutes ago was, we didn't know if this was going to be a 30-day thing, 6-month thing. And, now here we are. It has become a long-term solution. I think, similarly to Zoom, DocuSign, is set up for, to thrive in this sort of remote working environment, right? Digital documentation and, some of the contract lifecycle management tools. And I mentioned, Ron, remote online notary, which is coming soon. is value adds. Like those are definitely going to be helpful for the customer, but figuring out what it is that they're going through, what's their plan through this pandemic. I think a lot of times, especially when this first started and kicked off, speaking directly to the residential real estate space, there's just been a lot of uncertainty, right? And so, with that uncertainty comes, how are you guys thinking about navigating this? I think, a lot of the bigger, brokerages in North America were really focused, on the, not furloughing employees and keeping folks on board and making sure that their teams are whole. And so the question then pivoted, from a DocuSign perspective is how can we help you achieve that, right? How can we help you, make your way through this unprecedented time and be successful at the end of it? And so, we're razor focused on that just as much as we are about, expanding clients and getting stuff out there.
And Barry, when we think about you and the role that you play with all of the students, and I do want folks who are attending to recognize that Barry's going to be a great resource for some of your next best and greatest hires here. But when I think about the students that you're working with, Barry, I would think that they have a greater ability to adapt to change because they don't have any point of reference as to what this looked like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago in their career. What have you noticed about their ability to roll with things and be responsive in the virtual space?
Great point. When freshmen and sophomore come into our program, many of their first questions are, well, I assume I can just sell through text, right? Slack is just going to let me sell. I never have to meet the customer anyways. So Jen, to your point, mentally, they are ready for virtual world. They are ready to actually try to sell without meeting their customer face-to-face. However, we teach them that relationships are not dead and they will not go away. But to your point, their adaptability at understanding things like Slack and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and using text and understanding fantastic, products out there that are sales enablement tools, the outreaches of the world, the high spots of the world, they get that and understand that. So we are teaching that to 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And so they will be flexible to the changing environment. Now, take someone my age. Yeah, I sound good, don't I? But do I really live with Slack and LinkedIn as much as I should? No. So I have a little bit of a curiosity where email fits into the future. And if we are going to use email to sell, I'm hanging on with my nails to email to insist to my kids that they still have to learn it. But they're adapting much quicker than we are. And so I'm encouraged by that because they certainly embrace technology. What they don't quite yet still get is that personal relationships are the critical piece that they still need to learn how to develop that trust.
Well, and we're going to get to Kurt in just a second about that. But Barry, I do want to follow up. There's also something, if you have lived your entire life on Slack or Facebook or with Twitter or whatever it is, your response time is also next to immediate, right? Like I have an easier time putting my phone down and not responding for a while. But I think for your students who are coming out, there is something to be said about good customer service, good response time when you are working with those clients.
Absolutely the case. A double-edged sword. The positive is, you bet. If I texted a student right now, I get a response back immediately. The 3 dots would start bubbling immediately. So they are in tune, at least to this device. Email, not quite as much, but they are absolutely following up. A social party, as you can imagine, in college is as much talking to this as it is to the person right across from them. So that's the positive side. What we teach and need to engage with is this needs to go away when we're on a Zoom call. This needs to go away when we're doing virtual selling, because the listening skill is being challenged by this device. And my rule is just, you turn it off, you put it away. I'm violating my rule right now, but I have not looked at that throughout this whole call, and that's what we're trying to push. But when we're not on Zoom, Jem, to your point, they'll be responsive, like immediately.
I would say this, technically you did not violate it because it was a neat magic trick that it fades into your background. So I think you're still right on point with what it is that you're teaching your students. No problem with that one. Hey, Kurt, everything that Barry's saying about being responsive, about the virtual skills, all of that is going to continue to be important. But why is your biggest fear what happens after COVID?
Well, I mean, business-wise, my concern with what happens after COVID is, we've been selling to buyer communities, right? If your ASP is 25K or larger, typically you're selling to multiple parties. Not everybody's going back to the office, right? There'll be some portion of people that do and some portion of people that work from home for a variety of reasons. And so I think a lot of us have adjusted to selling in a virtual environment. But what do you do when you walk into a conference room and there's 6 people that are in person and 6 people that are on Zoom? Like, that's a crazy sort of multi-personality sales style that you have to have, because it's easy to read the body language of the room and engage with people when you're there. But we know virtually it's not. I mean, some of the tips and tricks that Barry's talking about is one of the ways you keep people engaged. But the constant gazing back and forth and trying to read who's in, who's out, some cameras are on, some cameras are off, I think it becomes like a nightmare situation. And one of the things that Shauna talked about was this constant preparation. There's like a few more steps of preparation. Like, maybe you need to meet with the remote people individually or in smaller groups to get their buy-in, and because you also have this kind of talking over each other in the in-person and virtual setting. And so I think you almost have to treat those two as 2 different sales cycles, and then you bring them all together in an attempt to do a soft close and then a hard close. But I think that's the challenge, is sales cycles are just going to get longer. And that's a whole nother sales skill that, quite honestly, most of us have never had to deal with. Because usually the people that are remote are not as important in the sales cycle. That may not be the case. So I'd say that's my biggest sort of fear for what does it do to sales when we come back.
Well, and we've spent so much time talking about the external factors, right? The clients, the stakeholders, all of that. But there's also the internal component that we need to be considering. And Shauna, you have mentioned that there's something really big that gets overlooked in this current environment when we talk about sales. What is that from your point of view, and how does that affect your people?
I would say for right now, it's really about the employee experience and connecting to people and building that culture. And, that's so much of what we sell at Limeade, yet we've come into this era where that looks really different. And so, for me personally, it's been challenging to figure out, how do I keep my team engaged? How do I help keep them connected and loyal and feeling as though there's a community that they have here at work? And so that's one of the things, is that we're having more open, vulnerable conversations as a team than we've ever had. I mean, we just had a call this morning about literally the concept of Zoom burnout, and what are these other kind of social norms that you have for work around being, on your computer 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or whatever it is. And how do we break those norms so that they're adjusting to the life that you're living now? And we kind of went into COVID again, thinking, to Kurt's point, this is going to be over quickly. We don't need to adjust. But it's real evident that we do. And so we've really dialed it back and just allowed people the freedom they need to meet all, facets of their life.
And I would say also it's recognizing that this affects your team, right? Which sounds like a really basic thing to say, but you cannot expect people who are in a people-driven business to not be personally affected by this.
Yeah. And I'm fortunate. I have a few people on my team that have been open about, hey, I'm feeling, I'm struggling because I'm used to this life of working at home, because all our sales directors work across the country, but I have coffees with people and lunch and learns and, happy hours and all of these things that are gone. So now my lifeline has been cut. And so that's where we've tried to have virtual happy hours, but then people get burnt out on those, and trying to just get creative around how we connect to each other, and also starting every one-on-one with the real honest conversation around, how are you doing today? Because I know for myself, it's a roller coaster. So how I was yesterday is totally not how I am today.
Yep, absolutely. And I think Joe's got a few ideas on how to be creative with engagement, because Joe, I love the idea that you send care packages to your team. How does that work?
Hey, Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, and then, I totally agree with everything that Shauna is saying. And then, enter in the remote school as well, that a lot of folks are juggling, which, compounds it even more. I feel like I need to schedule Zoom calls around, the, 9 and 15-year-old to make sure that we're not all jabbering at the same time. Care packages is, it's not a rocket science concept. It's nothing that we came up with on our own. Speaking with some of the various, leaders within not only DocuSign, but other, tech leaders from, around the country with, what's working. And that was a cool trend. And so, just checking in with folks, making sure that, they know that I care about them, and, getting things specific for folks that have, like a dog, making sure that, the dogs are taken care of with some chew toys and like some tennis balls. If it's a cat, then we've got some cat toys going on there. If it's kids, it's something to keep them busy. I've got somebody on our squad that has triplets as an example. And so, just making sure that we're making that personal touch that we care about not only their well-being, and we talked about it earlier, but it feels good to get a package in the mail, right? So getting something to do that. I even it sounds silly, but even a refill of pens, right? Because it was a couple months into the pandemic, and I was like, well, your pen's probably running out of ink because you haven't been by the office in a long time. So here's a couple fresh pens for you. Just silly stuff like that. I know from the feedback from the folks that have received them have just gone really well with that. And I would say that is, even though we haven't had the opportunity to see anybody live from my extended org, through this pandemic, I feel oddly so much closer to a lot of the folks that are on my extended team, because, the conversations are more personal. The things that we're, touching base into, Shauna, great point of, kicking off the one-on-ones of like, how's your day going? It's a roller coaster for everybody. And, that counts with, our internal, employee base, but that also extends out, again, I feel like repeating, but, to our customers, to our partners, to those folks that we're interacting with, in this remote environment, and making sure that, that everybody's okay.
And I also want to point out, one of the ways that you have that engagement on weekly calls is you track steps. How in the world, your team summited Mount Everest by tracking their steps, which I thought was a really creative way to engage without just in a different conversation.
We did. Yeah. It was a really fun way of doing it. We did that at the end of last quarter. It was somebody, I can't take the credit for it. Our enterprise group and leadership had started that process. And I thought, we've got a really large org within real estate that extends, beyond sales. We've got our onboarding team here in North America. We've got our customer success team. We've got our business development group. We've got a development team that oversees our rooms real estate product and our remote online notary that we're in process of building. And so, I just created a Google sheet. Everybody would log in there and log their steps per day. And we're responsible for going 29,000 feet. And so, within a matter of, some folks took care of it in a couple of weeks. It took some folks a little bit longer, but, we kind of started off every meeting, kind of measuring, going through it. We're sharing a bunch of stuff from a social media perspective of pictures while folks were, out. Some people were doing it on runs. Some people were walking their dog. But it was a really fun way to do it. And the next idea that we have on tap is to, we're going to do the walk across America, and we're going to follow Forrest Gump's route that he went through, all of the states when he went on that run. I think, it'll bring a new definition. I'm not going to grow a Forrest Gump COVID beard. I'm going to keep it trimmed along the way, but it'll be fun for the, for the extended team nonetheless.
Yeah, I love those ideas. So we've got a few new ones that I had not heard before. Kurt, I'm going to have you add on. Barry, you're going to be on tap after Kurt to add on to what students are asking for and how you're engaging, so that we've all got some different ideas. But Kurt, what is the one thing you do to foster relationships with the people on your team right now?
Yeah, so, we do a lot of reflection. So we talk about a personal or professional win. And that's how we typically start our meetings, whether it's one-on-ones or even like the executive leadership team meetings. I think it gives us pause, gives us time to reflect. The reality is lines have blurred between personal and professional. It's just all one thing right now, it seems like, for better or for worse. So I think that's good. I think it also helps just provide context of like what's going on in our lives. There's a lot of what Shauna said that just resonates with me, which is, everybody's under a tremendous amount of stress, and that just manifests itself in very different ways. And so, sometimes a personal win could just be like my son or daughter made it through school, like without issue, right? Because it's a virtual school now for, it seems like almost everybody. And so I think those sort of things, also help sort of fill in the blanks for what we're doing when we're not tethered to our laptop or whatever it is we're working on. And that's helped, and it does create a little bit more vulnerability. So typically, I start, and then once I put myself out there, then people are like, okay, like this is where I can take the conversation. And I think that's super important. I mean, empathy and understanding with our customers, our employees is absolutely critical at this point in time. We're going to ask them to run with us. We need to sort of exhibit that same behavior.
And, I would say, Kurt, I had an experience last week where there had been a really tense meeting, and there were some words exchanged during that meeting that just were not okay. And so in a follow-up meeting, I addressed that. And when you talk about having context to what people are going through, what came out in the follow-up meeting was there was a cancer scare and a visit to an oncologist, and there was a ton of things going on that day that had nothing to do with the conversation. Of course, it manifested itself in the way that the conversation, I felt terrible, right? That I didn't understand, but also it's about having the vulnerability. And once the guard came down and you could see what was going on behind the scenes in the context, it shifted everything about the way the message was heard, the way the message was delivered, and it really opened up those lines of communication. So I think for a lot of us who are used to being leaders and used to being at the front, it is important. And I know everybody's mentioned that, to drop your guard first, so that other people recognize it's okay. And in fact, it's almost required that they are doing the same thing so that we can maintain relationships and community together. Barry, I am going to ask you for your way that you build relationships with your students. Then we're going to talk about the onboarding process, and then it is time for audience Q&A. If you have any of those questions you have not been able to submit yet, please pop those into the chat. We'll get to those in just a few minutes. Barry, have I bought you enough time? Are you ready?
Jen, you can be professional and have fun at the same time. I hope we all agree with that. So everybody's lighten up with Zoom, lighten up with WebEx, lighten up with Microsoft Teams. Have some fun with it, yet maintain your professionalism. So, I've got a dog. Put a tie and glasses on the dog, and he's the teacher's assistant. Bring him on the Zoom, have some fun with him, have prizes, have trivia contests, use breakout rooms, use polls, engage your audience. Now, maybe easier for me because I'm with students, in large numbers. So I have the luxury of being able to change things up and not keep on topic the whole time. But at least I find that it's okay, like your Halloween candy question, lighten it up a little bit. You will be surprised and pleased how you will engage your audience if you give out a contest prize or if you give out a trivia question win. And they don't have to, as we all know, prizes don't need to be expensive. It's amazing how far a t-shirt will go. Amazing.
Especially with a college student. Yeah.
Trample over each other for a t-shirt. So I just like to lighten it up. And I don't speak for more than 20 minutes, or at least if any of my students are watching, they're probably laughing right now because I have been known to go over 20 minutes, but my goal is 20 minutes tops. And if I have 20 minutes, got to ask at least 4 or 5 questions and lighten it up. Then we move to a breakout room. Then we move to a series of polls. Then we move to another topic. So the engagement element for me is critical. Now, can you do that in a sales environment? If you use taste and you're not being too cutesy and you know your client well enough, yes. Maybe not on first visit. We don't teach our students to put on a crazy costume and bring their dog in with a tie on first visit. because you don't know what your customer's like. But the second time, maybe. Third time, if they got a sense of humor, you bet. And have some fun with it, because they'll want to get on the Zoom with you.
Yeah. And I will say this, trivias and prizes work in Seahawks meetings rooms. That is one of the ways that they keep themselves engaged on Zoom meetings. They have contests in their weekly meetings. So there you go. You're borrowing from the pros. We're going to go to Kurt, then Joe, then Shauna, as we talk about the onboarding experience. We'll get final thoughts from the panelists before we open this up to the audience for questions. Kurt, again, when we talk about fostering these relationships, it is as much about working with clients and prospects as it is with the people on your team. When you go to onboard somebody, why and how is it important to create a curated experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, every individual is different, right? We all recognize that at its basic sense. But I think, we used to have, like most companies, a specific day of the week where we try to onboard every employee all at once. And sometimes that doesn't work, especially with people being remote. So I think understanding that everybody has their own sort of timeline, right? And part of introducing flexibility starts with everything from the very beginning, right? So, when I map it to the sales process, we always talk about like the buyer's journey, right? The reality is, sales has a process that we run, but the buyer's process, hopefully, or most likely is different. Hopefully we've mapped our process to support that. It's the same thing when you onboard new employees. And I think the concept of virtual buddies and those sort of things are really, really important. The frequent touch points and check-ins. To Joe's point, like welcome kits and sending them swag. It doesn't matter if it's, a t-shirt or Yeti mug, like whatever it might be. All those things are greatly appreciated. It's just another way to demonstrate that you have empathy and you're excited about the relationship, whether it's with your customer or your employee.
And back to Joe on this one, how have you kind of taken all of this and restructured the onboarding process at DocuSign?
Yeah, massive compliments to our learning team who, really, spearheaded, breaking, because normally with tech companies, it's pretty standard. You have like an onboarding week, a boot camp or, something of that nature to get folks up to speed on, company policies, sales methodology. Now that we're a multi-product company, we're doing certifications and, our e-sign product, our customer lifecycle management product, our rooms product, so on and so forth. Like our AI and analytics tools. So it's a lot to cram into a week anyways. And so the big question was, how do we revamp this so that we can land all of these really important components with, these remote learning groups? I think one of the things, talk about having empathy. Can you imagine being a new hire, starting with a new company that you're so excited about getting rolling and like never meeting anybody yet? I've been in the process of, I've hired people for the first time that I've never met in person, which was really weird for me. I think, having global roles in a previous life, I mean, even when I was going to give somebody an offer letter, we would at least fly them in, whether it was from Dublin or Sydney or somewhere to have that face-to-face meeting to make sure that, you're investing massively in these folks. And so to answer the question more directly, Jen, sorry, we've broken it apart into pieces. And that onboarding experience is now done in various pockets. And so it's extended out further than a week. It pulls in, leadership to validate and help support them through that experience as well. And it's not just leadership, it's also peers. So we've standardized kind of a more collaborative, interaction, which, inevitably happens, in the old model. But I think, again, as everyone's talking about empathy, and folks' happiness and kind of getting towards success is even, it's more critical in this environment than really ever before. And it may change things for, long term. We'll just have to see.
Exactly. I mean, these could be skills that we're using for a long time. And Shauna, for you have onboarded a few folks right during the middle of the pandemic. Why did you include some research projects for one of your new hires?
Yeah, so I had a couple people start just right as COVID was kind of hitting in those 2 months prior. And so what happened, our buyers HR, so they went pretty silent for those first few months of COVID. And there was a lot of downtime, which of course to a sales director is a very scary thing. But we have our Limeade Institute, which is really like our think tank to our product and our roadmap. And from that, we have all sorts of great research and white papers, ebooks, webinars, all that type of thing. And so I wanted people to spend time, every week, pick 2 to 3 pieces from that and study it, understand it, get to know our strategies, our approach, and then share it back with me. Not only because it's stuff that maybe I'm rusty on because I've been here for 7 years, but also because it helps the learning if you have to teach others back. And so then it was just kind of this homework assignment that people were working on. And I think it was really helpful for those that were doing it.
I think that's a great idea. Folks are struggling to figure out how to connect some of those new hires to the bigger group and to the organization as a whole. We could keep talking. I could keep asking questions, but I know that we have some audience questions. Before we get to that, I do want to allow each panelist to sum up their key thoughts from today. So in about 90 seconds or so, we're going to have each one of our panelists give you a couple things that you should reflect on. So Kurt, how about if you go first with what it is that you want the audience to think about?
Yeah, so there's a Vince Lombardi coach, which is if you're 5 minutes early, you're 10 minutes late. Pete basically says, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. Pete Carroll. And basically what that means is, you have to show up prepared, but you do have to show up early to these events, and it can seriously change the trajectory of a call and a relationship. Create a curated experience. And so oftentimes for me, that's just commenting on what's in the background and trying to really put in the extra effort to make sure that every interaction is unique and different with the intent of moving the deal forward or the relationship forward. And then people still buy from people. So relationships really do matter. Barry said that in the beginning. But the reality is you have to find those connection points. And everybody right now is looking to make the safe choice, right? There's not a lot of energy around disruption and re-innovation and all that sort of stuff. It's like, just how do I do something that's safe, that isn't going to get me fired, and that's going to keep the company alive?
Yeah, that's really good points. Joe, how about you? What are your key takeaways?
Yeah, I think, starting with, impacting others. I think, everybody's been, a lot of talk about empathy and, how we're approaching, customers, our employees, and making sure that, in this remote environment that you're listening and hearing everybody out. I think, being personal is a huge takeaway. Let others inside of what your journey is. Kurt had mentioned some good icebreakers, you uses that method. And then, to just align with what's going on in theirs. And that way, collectively as a group, you can be a little more productive. And then lastly, just be creative. I think, let it fly. I think, in this environment, there's really there's no wrong answers. If there's dogs, coming onto meetings, I think, everybody's been through the embarrassment of, maybe if you've got kids at home, maybe like, a temper tantrum in the background or, again, using dogs running through the house or barking. It's just, we've always had that in a remote environment, but it's even more so now. And so, being creative as a leadership team, connecting with your groups, connecting with your customers, just let it fly. And, I think, being vulnerable yourself is a good strategy, and just, connecting with folks on a more personal basis.
Shauna, what would you like to add?
Yeah, definitely, some themes here. I would say, right now, none of us know how to sell during a global pandemic. This is new to all of us. So if ever there's been a time to be risky and try something new and be prepared to fail, it's right now. So, be working with your ABM managers or inside sales, and allow your team to also then have that creativity, bring new things to the table from places they've worked before, try something new and maybe kind of out of the box and crazy, because the worst that's going to happen is it won't work, and then you reshift and try something else. And then really, going back to just what we've heard already, is be open and be honest, be vulnerable. And I mean that from both the manager side and the employee side, that your manager's not going to know how to help you or what's going on in your life if you are not willing to share that. They can't help you with what they don't know. And so on the manager side, you really have to create that psychological safety for people to feel comfortable to just be themselves and be honest about where they're at. Because, you know, right now it's if you can't cultivate and create and keep your culture and your people, you know, nobody's coming out of this ahead.
Absolutely. Barry, how about if you bring it home here? What you got?
Okay, really an iteration of what all my esteemed colleagues say, but I'll give you an acronym. Being the academic, I guess I'll give you an acronym. There's 3 E's that we talk about: energy, engagement, and empathy. Energy, as we said, is simply show up, be prepared, be the driver, because you will lose your client very quickly if you're bored, right? Engagement. Ask open-ended questions, get them involved. Don't ask, do you something, ask, how do you something. Don't ask, would you something, ask, how would you something. So engage with them. And then finally, empathy, as Joe has said very eloquently, listen. Now's the time to listen. Let your customers drive it and customize your solution. Do not let your operations manager run the product the way they think the customer wants. Give the customer what the customer wants.
Yeah, now is the time to take the chances and to build relationships with customers using customization. I love those takeaways, and I would love to hear what we have from the audience. David, the man behind the scenes and behind the microphone, has a few questions. What do you have for us, David?
Yeah, I've got some questions. And in the spirit of just have some fun and we've put a hat on it. So there you go. I'm embracing the advice that our panelists have given on the don't wear a suit and don't wear a coat. All right, with that said, let's go into our questions. The first question I have is, while there may be some definite downsides to having to sell into virtual clienteles, what are the benefits to selling virtually? Is the process of selling actually easier, and what are the upsides?
Shauna, I see you nodding your head first, so why don't you take half of that question? And Joe, I saw you smiling next. You're going to take the second half of that question.
Sure. Yeah. I think that, you know, there's a little bit of that sales dog and pony show that's been stripped away, right? That schmoozing that happens in person, which there's something absolutely to be said about that. Some people are better at that than others, and that game's been removed a little bit. So now it's put a bigger focus on the product itself. And so I think there is some beauty in that, and really focusing on, let's take all of the glitz and glamour away, and just really focus on, are we the right partner for you? So, you know, for me, that's really where, you know, I've seen the upside is that it's leveled some playing fields.
Joe, go ahead and take the other half of that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, you know, I think, you know, it's given everybody an opportunity to refine, you know, what this remote environment, you know, selling, you know, looks like. I think, you know, the ability to focus on, you know, solution selling is not a new concept in sales. I mean, let's be honest. But I think, you know, it's really amplified in this remote environment. And I find that, you know, folks are very protective of their time right now. You know, you mentioned, you know, Zoom fatigue and, you know, having, you know, a lot of meetings. I think it's challenging to shut it down at the end of the day. And so I think, you know, with working with customers and working with folks with these interactions, I mean, everybody is very protective of, you know, engaging in conversations. They're not going to be having conversations if they're not interested in moving forward, either with your solution or if it's expanding, or, you know, if it's looking for ideas that we can consult on kind of how to run their business better, whether it's through this pandemic or whether it's, you know, after the fact, just, you know, in general. So I think it's definitely given us an opportunity to focus on, you know, what matters most, right? That's the people, and that's really the problems that we're solving. And so it's helped accelerate that in some ways. And so if there is a silver lining, I would say that it's that.
Way to tag team that answer. Nicely done. David, what's next?
Yeah, you know what? We're going to tag team the answer to that with the next question. This question is specifically to Kurt because it starts with Banzai. That's how I know it's for Kurt. And the question is from Wendy. You said the Banzai is in the virtual event space. What early trends are you seeing, and what are you doing to deal with virtual meeting burnout?
I think the big thing was in the early days of switching from in-person to virtual events, people were just throwing events in the calendar. It was kind of like a glorified sales call. A crass way of saying it would be show up and throw up. As Shauna said, thankfully the sales approach has evolved, and we've stripped away that dog and pony show. And so it's less about us as the provider and more about what the customer wants. And so what we've seen is, marketers now are really aligning the virtual events to the buyer's journey, right? So they're saying, here's top of funnel activities, which would be education on the space, and here's how we're different, and then here's a panel of our customers, and kind of taking people through that sales process and engaging them with that relevant content. So I'd say that's the really big thing. But then also recognizing that everybody can show up when you schedule that webinar, which oftentimes is like a random time on a Tuesday at 11 o'clock that works for you, but not necessarily all of your prospects or customers. And so recording those and making those available on demand, as silly as it sounds, lots of companies were not doing that, and not making it gated, making it available for people to consume, because ultimately that's the goal. And so I think that's been sort of the biggest transformation we've seen. And the other one is engaging your audience. And Barry mentioned this, he does this with his classrooms. The reality is people, the one-to-many approach doesn't necessarily work. You want to have engagement. As a salesperson, you want your prospects to qualify in or disqualify out. And so you need to create those opportunities for them to raise their hand, to take surveys, to ask questions, and time to answer all of that. And it's basically just treating those events like you would an in-person event or any sort of meaningful conversation, right? The goal is the relationship, not just to get it on the calendar or get 20 butts in seats and get it over with. It's actually to create and progress deals. And so I think, marketers that see that, like salespeople get it, right? Because at the end of the day, we're still on the line for quota. No one goes, well, the world's changed. You can sell less. It's like, that hasn't happened. At least not in my org. And so I think marketers are kind of coming around to we need a virtual event strategy. And thankfully it's aligning to the buyer's journey, and that's helping things a lot.
I'm going to give you two phrases, Kurt. One is a replacement for your show up and throw up.
Okay, please.
In sports, we would just say show and go.
Okay.
Right? So if it's a show and go game, there's no pregame work. The guys just show up, they get dressed, they go and play. I'm just going to throw that out there as a thought. And then when you say give people time to answer poll questions, I would call it pacing and intentional pauses. If you have not scripted in intentional pauses, you are not giving your audience a chance to either A, engage, or B, catch up with what you have actually said. So make sure that gets scripted in as well. But I love what you said, Kurt. Minus the throw up part. That's not.
Like I said, it was crass. I gave the early warning.
I did. You did preface it. Yes. David, do you have anything else for us in the last few minutes here?
I do. And actually, I want to dovetail on Kurt's. I was intentionally listening, and I want to dovetail on Kurt's answer also. Now, we don't play in the same sandbox at Badon Hill Group that Kurt plays, but we do manage virtual events and webinars and stuff like that. And one of the points that Kurt made is that a lot of companies were not recording and making the information available after the fact and digestible from when people could get it. That's what we were seeing out of the gate too. And we were advising clients, you really should record this and have a post-production. Nah, we don't need to do that. And at the end of the day, you're going to listen to the client. At least on our side, you're going to advise, but listen. But we are seeing that turn, and we are seeing people more going, well, what's the long tail that we can get out of this content? So we're seeing the same thing, and I would echo the same thing. If you're doing a virtual event, you need to record it, and you need to have a marketing strategy on how to reuse and amplify that content. So I'm just going to put that out there. Next question comes from Nicole. And first of all, she gives kudos to all the panelists, and I'm going to share that part. I think that is a fantastic point on the listening piece that all panelists made. In fact, it was all great points. On calls with larger audiences, I am seeing and experiencing a fine line between participants, salespeople, and/or clients talking over or being talked over, particularly in the situation where a point is on differentiation. What are your observations, and what are best practices for managing when people are talking over each other?
I have my own strategies, but I'm going to say, who wants to take this one? Just raise your hand and I will, Kurt's got it. I see the first hand go up for Kurt. By the way, that's one of the ways that you prevent people from talking over each other. Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so I think part of it is you just have to moderate the conversation, right? So lots of people in sales calls, and Shauna talked about this, when the sales engineer is speaking, the sales director historically was checking email or playing Tetris or whatever it is up their game on their phone. But the reality is everybody has a role. And I think when one person from the selling company is having the conversation, the other one has to pay attention and make sure that we know who's speaking and what questions they have, and try to read whatever body language you can. That's why cameras on are so important. But I think you also have to afford time to say, okay, does everybody agree? Do we not agree? And if we're going down this rabbit hole, which oftentimes we do, right? Like things just go tangentially wrong. You just pigeonhole that and you say, okay, we're going to come back. So the concept of a parking lot, I think, is a great way to sort of, control the conversation, if you will, or at least guide it. We found in a lot of our meetings when they get large, we just set up ground rules, and people use chat, or they use the raise the hand icon or whatever it is if they have questions. But the goal of those meetings is to only have the people you need to have on the call, right? I mean, people are all good with less meetings. So we use a decision-making framework called DACY. It's nothing special. Lots of people use it to help with the process, particularly when it's internal meetings. But externally, we make sure we set up a sort of understanding of not just the agenda, but what are the rules of the road that everybody follows, and make sure everybody gets that voice. Again, that goes back to that, listening.
Yep. I love it. David, do we have time for another one?
Well, that was my question. We've hit time, and if our panelists are okay, if we go a few minutes over, we have maybe 2 more questions. So if our panelists are okay going a couple of minutes over, I see all nodding heads here.
Sure.
So we'll go. We have a question from Caroline. Giving everyone is constantly adjusting to the current environment, figuring out and dealing with each new change as they occur. Would you say this has slowed the way we build and develop our professional networks? It's a great question.
I'm going to give the panelists, I was going to say, Barry, I think you and I talked a little bit about this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll get a little track at that. I think that the answer could be yes or no, Caroline. By the way, fine University of Washington Husky she is. I know that. Panel, I would sense that it all depends on our individual approach to this. I have expanded my network tremendously over the last 6 months. I still had a good network to begin with, but I am voracious about my LinkedIn connections and focusing on those. I'm voracious about welcoming any meeting that I have, because I'm not trying to fight Seattle traffic, and I'm not trying to shorten my day. I'm a creature of habit. I will work my X hours of a day, and I will expand my network because I need to and I want to. Now, I know others that have been able to shorten their day. I'm not being critical. I sound like I'm being preachy, and I'm not. I think there are others that haven't been as voracious about expanding their network and getting on Zoom calls and picking up the phone and calling. And by the way, if I can get on a Zoom, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to do the phone anymore. I will go Zoom. So I think, David, I will answer Caroline's question by saying, depends on the individual. And my high recommendation is get active with it. Get after it. This is the kind of business we're in. I want to get to know you. I don't want to just shorten my day by hiding behind the virtual blanket.
Shauna, I see you nodding your head an awful lot to what Barry said. Would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, and I had the same experience in some regard, but actually a pretty different experience in others, in that, so much of our business was this in-person connection. So being at big industry events, having these, consultant lunch and learns. And so trying to really broaden my network in a meaningful way, I would say has absolutely become harder. Because I don't necessarily like to connect with absolutely anyone, particularly because there's a lot of, no offense to those people, but sales and marketing agencies that do try to connect. I really am looking for meaningful connections, and that absolutely has been harder. However, with those that I am connecting with, we're getting to a deeper level than we used to, because there's no way around having honest conversations around, what does the last 6 months look like for you? How are you doing? How's your family doing? Like these things that maybe were just sort of surfaced quick talk in the past, they're genuine and it's real now.
And I'm going to throw this out there. If you guys are looking for a way to expand the network, part of it is you have to create a sense of community. I always advocate for this, but use sports to your advantage. Look, we've already talked. We've got Huskies, we've got Cougs on this call. There is a built-in follow-up opportunity for every single sports season. You don't have to wonder, when should I reach out to this person? You should reach out when the Huskies win, when the Cougs win, when the season starts, when the season ends, when the Seahawks go to the playoffs. There's all sorts of ways to connect, and you build community around things that you have in common. Sports is something that a lot of people have in common, says the sports broadcaster of the group. That's my disclaimer, but it works. David, last question that we've got.
Yeah, exactly. Last question. I'm going to ask it away that we can get for the answers. So
we're going rapid fire is what I'm sensing.
Rapid fire, exactly.
Okay.
I'm going to reword it a little bit. This one is coming from Rick. If I want to make a career change, wait out COVID or not? Meaning if I want to change jobs, I would say. If I want to change my job, wait out COVID or not?
Definitely not. I think, depending on, what you're, we just talked about networking. I think, being hyperactive on things like LinkedIn is, that's one way, when you're on your calls and connecting with folks. I think, doing the research and maybe, define career change, like something totally different, making a massive pivot. I've got folks that I know really closely that have done that through this time. It's a good opportunity to connect with folks that are hiring. If it's something that, you want to maybe switch roles or companies. And I think the most important thing that I'll just land is, do what you're passionate about. If you're not doing something that, really motivates and moves you to get up every day and you're super into doing it, like it fulfills something with you personally, then it's safe to say that, you can definitely make a leap into doing something different. I don't think that this time should slow you down.
All right, good. Joe set the stage for that one. So Barry, we're going to have you add on to that quickly. Then it's going to go Kurt and then Shauna.
I'll just look big picture. I don't want to spit out statistics, but many of us think we're in double-digit unemployment. Yesterday, it was tick over 8%. Okay, not where we want it to be, but a tick over 8% still leads a lot of opportunities. And I could just speak to my students. Placement rate for my students who graduated in June, 93% of them have jobs now. So I'm bullish on the market more than others. If you're good, go after something different, because you can find a job. People are looking for good people now more so than they ever have been. Now, I'm not saying if you're not good, I mean, that's a rhetorical comment, but if there are jobs out there. I got 93% of 22-year-olds getting jobs between June and now. There are jobs out there. Go get them.
Kurt, add to that.
Yeah, so everything's virtual. Geography is no longer a limitation on where you can be employed. So I think if you're, to Barry's point, if you're solid, and now's the time to lean into it. The things and the places that you couldn't go because you didn't live there no longer exist.
Shauna, what's the final thing?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was just going to piggyback on that real quick. We're seeing so many companies that we work with open to remote work right now that it's not a limitation anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would just say that it's such a personal choice right now. You have to be honest with yourself, and probably have the person closest to you be honest with you as well about where's your emotional state, how many plates are you spinning, right? If you're trying to manage homeschooling and your own emotional health that may not be stable at the time, it's not the right time. But for others, they've lost a lot of their social life and connections and activities. And it's a perfect time to dive in and have that, uncomfortable, unknown first 6 months of a new job. So really just be honest with yourself about where you're at.
And there you go. The panelists have spoken. David, we will give you the final word.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for their participation today. And I want to thank our excellent panelists for providing a masterclass on selling and relationships. and onboarding fresh talent during what I would call this is the new normal. And we actually really struggled with the title on this one. Do we say the new normal because it's so overused, or do we say COVID? But I think all the panelists have made the point that we are in a new normal. This webinar will be available for on-demand replay later this week, and we will be sending all registered attendees an email with a link to get to that webinar. Stay tuned for the next TalentReach hosted webinar coming in the late fall. And this concludes our webinar. And thank you once again, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.